There's a place in southern Egypt where the rock itself seems to be hiding something. Walk into the ancient quarries of Aswan, past the tour buses and the guides reciting the same rehearsed lines, and you'll find yourself standing beside grooves cut into granite that do not look like anything a Bronze Age hand should have been able to make. They are not jagged. They are not the rough gouges of stone striking stone. They curve. They repeat. They sit there in rows, one after another, with a rhythm that feels less like labor and more like machinery. And for well over 100 years, almost everyone who has walked past them has accepted the same explanation without really testing it against what their own eyes were telling them. That explanation is about to be put through a filter it has never faced before. Not a historian's opinion, not a tour guide script, not a textbook footnote copy from the last textbook. An artificial intelligence, fed nothing but raw images and a blunt question. What tool made these marks? No context, no accepted theory to protect, just geometry, measurement, and pattern. And what it reportedly found has reignited one of the oldest arguments in archaeology, whether the people who built ancient Egypt were the inventors of what we see at Aswan, or simply the ones who found it. For most of the last century, the explanation for the Aswan marks has been treated less like a hypothesis and more like a foregone conclusion. Ancient Egypt had no iron tools hard enough to bite into granite. It had no bronze capable of holding an edge against a stone that dense. What it had, according to the standard account, was patience, endless supplies of it, and a rock called dolerite, darker and denser than the granite itself, which workers used as a pounding tool. Crews would stand in the quarry trenches for hours, lifting dolerite hammerstones and driving them down again and again, crushing the granite into powder one impact at a time rather than cutting it in any conventional sense. 20th century experimental archaeologists tested this, and to their credit, the method does work. Given enough hours and enough shoulders, a dolerite ball will wear granite down. That result has been cited for decades as proof that mystery solved, case closed, nothing further to see. But solving a mystery requires more than showing that a method is possible. It requires showing that the method actually produces what we see in the stone. And that is where the comfortable version of the story starts to strain. Anyone who has ever struck rock with rock knows the result is chaos, not order. Every blow lands slightly differently. The stone shatters unevenly along its natural fracture lines. Depths vary from strike to strike, because no human arm delivers identical force 10,000 times in a row. The surface left behind by percussion is rough, uneven, pockmarked, an honest record of 1,000 small, imperfect decisions made by a tired body over many hours. That is not what greets you at the finest sections of the Aswan Quarry. The scoops there are smooth-walled and evenly sized, arranged and sweeping, almost rhythmic arcs that repeat down the trench like the ripples on a pond frozen mid-motion. Run your palm across them, and there is no sharp edge to catch your skin, no sudden jump in depth, no chaos underneath your fingers, just a steady, gentle undulation. Dip after dip after dip, all roughly the same size, all roughly the same shape. It is a kind of regularity that, when you first notice it, makes you look around for a machine that must have made it before you remember there wasn't supposed to be one. This is a detail that makes the recent development worth taking seriously. Whatever conclusion you land on, the analysis wasn't performed by someone with a career, a department, or a decades-old theory to defend. High-resolution photographs of the Aswan marks, the trenches around the great unfinished obelisk, the deep test shafts, the vertical quarry walls, were fed into Grok, the AI system built by XAI, without any framing about who supposedly made them or when. No mention of dynastic Egypt, no mention of dolerite balls, just the raw geometry of the stone and a single instruction. Identify what kind of tool could have produced this pattern, and compare it against everything known about both ancient percussion techniques and modern precision cutting. What came back reportedly did not read like a cautious academic hedge. Instead of gently suggesting the traditional theory needed updating, the analysis is said to have flatly rejected hand-pounding as the origin of the most precise scoops, not because it was unlikely, but because the physical evidence didn't support it. According to those who examined the output, the model measured the scoops obsessively, with depth, spacing, curvature, check one against another across thousands of individual marks, building a statistical fingerprint that no human eye scanning a quarry wall could ever compile by hand. The headline number that people keep repeating from that analysis is a variation, reportedly under 5% across width and depth and under 3% in spacing, across marks that were supposedly cut by different workers on different days, over an unknown stretch of years. Whether or not you accept every digit at face value, the underlying claim is a provocative part. That kind of tolerance doesn't look like human effort. Human effort scatters. It has bad days and good days, tired afternoons and fresh mornings, workers with strong wrists and workers without. What was reportedly found at Aswan is closer to what you get from a fixed mechanism, something moving through a set arc as set radius, without fatigue, without drift, without a body attached to it that could grow tired or bored or careless by the 400th cut of the day. If the story stopped there, it would already be an interesting footnote. It doesn't stop there. Once the pattern matching turned to location rather than shape, things got harder to explain away. Some of the curve cuts reportedly continue underneath granite blocks that were never removed, blocks still sitting exactly where the ancient quarry left them, undisturbed for thousands of years. The arc of the cut runs into the shadow beneath the stone and keeps going, into a gap too shallow and too narrow for an arm to swing inside, let alone a body to kneel and work within. There are also the tight interior corners, where two cut faces meet at a sharp angle. Try to picture a man wedged into that angle with a handheld stone. Try and keep his swing consistent, while his own knuckles and the walls around him are fighting his motion. And yet the marks curling into those corners carry the same fixed curvature as the ones cut in open, comfortable space, as if whatever made them was entirely indifferent to constraints of a human torso. Then there is the vertical scale. On quarry walls that rise nearly straight up, similar marks appear at heights where a worker would need to be suspended, holding a heavy stone one-handed, delivering hundreds of control blows while dangling from some kind of rigging that has left no other trace in the archaeological record. When the locations of these marks were mapped, they reportedly showed no relationship at all to where a human body could realistically position itself to work. The cutting simply continues in an unbroken arc, as if the constraints of arms, shoulders, and balance were never a factor in the first place. If the surface marks are unsettling, the deep test pits scattered to the quarry are worse. These are narrow shafts, some driven 30, 40, even 50 feet straight down into solid granite, while measuring only 3 or 4 feet across. The conventional explanation is that they were exploratory, sunk to test the quality of the stone before committing to a larger extraction. It's a reasonable sounding idea until you try to picture the mechanics of actually doing it. There is no room in a shaft that narrow to raise a hammerstone and bring it down with any real force. A worker's own body would occupy most of the available space. The dust from pulverized granite would have nowhere to go in an unventilated hole that deep, and hauling shattered debris back up, bucket by bucket, through a passage barely wider than a man's shoulders, would be brutally slow even before accounting for failing light and thinning air the further down you go. What the analysis reportedly found inside these shafts is that the wall quality does not degrade with depth. If a tired, cramped, oxygen-starved worker were pounding his way downward in the dark, you would expect the bottom of the shaft to look rougher than the top, more desperate, less controlled. Instead, the finish holds steady from the surface all the way down, as if fatigue, darkness, and confinement never entered into the equation at all. That consistency is arguably the single hardest detail to reconcile to human labor working alone in a hole in the ground. The strangest claim to come out of this analysis involves the shape of those same shafts. Not all of them run straight down. Some curve as they descend, bending through the stone in a path that has nothing to do with a simple vertical drop. When those curves were compared against the internal mineral veins and structural fault lines running through granite, features completely invisible from the surface, they reportedly lined up. The shafts weren't wandering. They were tracking the hidden internal architecture of the rock, bending around weaknesses a modern geologist would only detect today using ground-penetrating radar or core sampling. Zoom out the layout of the quarry as a whole, and a similar pattern is said to emerge. Rather than the somewhat opportunistic, cut where the good stone is approach you'd expect from ancient trial and error, the trenches appear arranged to minimize stress on neighboring rock, to work with the grain of the crystal structure instead of against it, and to extract the maximum usable stone for the minimum amount of cutting across the entire site. That is not the signature of workers improvising as they went. That is the signature of a plan, the kind of layout you'd expect from an optimization process, not from generations of quarrymen figuring it out as they broke rock. Tucked into the southern end of the site is a broad, shallow depression that has traditionally been read as an old harbor basin, somewhere water could gather near the quarrying operations. Under the same fresh analysis, that reading is reportedly being challenged. Rather than a harbor, the depression's dimensions are said to more closely match a cavity, the negative space left behind after an enormous single block of stone was cut free and hauled away. The estimated mass of that missing block, by this reading, falls somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 tons. For scale, the largest confirmed Egyptian obelisk ever cut, the unfinished one still lying half attached to the Aswan bedrock, weighs roughly 1,100 tons. The heaviest confirmed block inside the Great Pyramid is closer to 80 tons. If the reinterpretation holds up, something several times heavier than any obelisk in the historical record was removed from that quarry, moved somewhere, and has never been identified in the archaeological record since. The detail that turns this from an interesting curiosity into something genuinely hard to dismiss involve a handful of faded red ochre drawings scattered across parts of the quarry. Birds, boats, simple symbolic markings typical to rock art left by peoples who lived long before the pharaohs. In several places, that ochre sits directly on top of the precision scoop marks, settled into the grooves rather than interrupted by them. That ordering matters enormously because it isn't ambiguous. Paint applied on top of a cut can only mean the cut existed first. And this particular style of rock art is conventionally dated to somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 years before the Common Era, meaning, if the association holds, that the most refined cutting in the entire quarry could predate the First Dynasty, could predate the pyramids at Giza, could predate the earliest confirmed evidence of unified Egyptian civilization altogether. Perhaps the hardest thing to explain away is a pattern that emerges when the quarry's work is sorted from oldest to newest. Ordinarily, we expect a technological story to move in one direction, crude beginnings giving way to refined mastery as skills accumulate over generations. What is reportedly found at Aswan runs the opposite way. The oldest material, the unattributed scoops with no hieroglyphs and no tool marks matching known bronze or copper implements, shows the highest precision. The material we can confidently date to the dynastic period, carved later, marked with tool signatures we recognize, occasionally accompanied by inscriptions, is measurably rougher, less consistent, unmistakably the product of ordinary hand labor. In other words, skill in this quarry doesn't appear to have been built up. It appears to have been lost. Whoever or whatever was responsible for the earliest and most refined work had already reached a level of precision that later generations, working the very same rock with recognizably ancient tools, could never recover. That leaves two explanations on the table, and neither one fits comfortably into the standard narrative. The first is that some phase of ancient Egyptian civilization possessed a cutting technology far beyond what we currently credit it with. Something that appeared, was used at a handful of sites, and then vanished so completely that not a single physical example of the tool itself has ever been recovered. The second is that the finest work at Aswan was never Egyptian to begin with, that it belongs to something earlier, a culture or a period we haven't named, whose mastery of stone the dynastic Egyptians simply inherited, admired, occasionally painted over, and were never able to replicate. Either way, the comfortable version of the story, patient men, dollright balls, centuries of steady effort, is not the version the stone itself is telling, at least according to this latest look at it. The marks are still there, in daylight, exactly where they've always been. The only thing that changed is who was asked to look at them, and what they were allowed to say. So here's the question we're sitting with. If the most advanced cutting in that quarry really does predate the pharaohs, who do you think was capable of it? And why do you think we spent a century explaining away instead of asking?